When I saw my fiancé's mistress walk into our wedding reception wearing that red dress, champagne glass in hand, looking at me with those smug eyes as she said, "I've been sleeping with Daniel for the past year? He never loved you," I thought. My world had ended. By midnight, they would both learn what it means to underestimate the wrong woman. Standing in my own wedding venue on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I realized I had been preparing for this moment all along without even knowing it. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The crystal chandeliers I had personally selected cast a warm glow across the grand ballroom of Rosewood Estate. Everything looked perfect. The cascading white orchids, the hand-carved ice sculptures, the string quartet playing softly in the high corner. 300 guests mingled in their finest attire, celebrating what they believed was my fairy tale ending. If only they knew. My wedding gown, a custom marchesa that had taken 8 months to create, suddenly felt too tight. The 5-carat diamond ring on my finger is too heavy. I stood frozen near the cake table, champagne flute in hand, as I watched a woman I'd never seen before glide through the entrance doors. She wasn't on the guest list. Even from across the room, I knew exactly who she was. The woman wore a fitted red dress that practically screamed for attention among the sea of formal black and subtle pastels. Her dark hair was styled in loose waves, ruby lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged, though she clearly didn't. Daniel, my fiancé of 3 years, now husband of approximately 2 hours, was across the room speaking with his parents. He hadn't noticed her yet, but when he did, the color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. I watched as he excused himself and made a beeline toward the woman, intercepting her before she could venture further into the reception. Their hushed conversation looked intense, his hand gripping her elbow as he tried to steer her toward the exit. She wasn't budging. That's when I decided to approach them. "Daniel," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The woman turned to me with a predatory smile. Up close, she was even more striking, late 20s with sharp cheekbones and eyes that held a calculating intelligence. "Olivia," she said, extending her hand to me. "Olivia Martinez. I work with Daniel at the firm." I took her hand, noting the perfect manicure, the expensive watch on her wrist. "Charlotte Winters. Though I suppose it's Charlotte Reynolds now." I glanced at Daniel, whose expression had morphed from panic to resignation. "How do you two know each other exactly?" Before Daniel could speak, Olivia's smile widened. "Oh, we know each other quite well, don't we, Danny?" The nickname landed like a slap. No one called him Danny. No one except, apparently, this woman. "Charlotte," Daniel started, his voice low. "Let's discuss this somewhere private." "Why?" I asked, maintaining my composure even as I felt something crumbling inside me. "Olivia came all this way to our wedding. She clearly has something to share." The woman's eyes flickered with surprise. She had expected tears, hysteria perhaps. Instead, she was met with calm inquiry. It threw her off balance, but only for a moment. "I've been sleeping with Daniel for the past year," Olivia announced, her voice just loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "He never loved you. This wedding, it's just for show, for his career, for his family's expectations." She took a sip of champagne she'd somehow acquired. "He was with me last night, by the way. Said he needed to get his last taste of freedom. Isn't that right, Danny?" The string quartet's music seemed to fade away as a strange ringing filled my ears. I looked at Daniel, searching his face for denial, for outrage, for anything that would contradict her words. Instead, I found guilt. "Charlotte," he whispered, reaching for my hand. It's complicated." I pulled away from his touch. "Is it true?" His silence was answer enough. The realization didn't hit me like a tidal wave as I'd always imagined such betrayal would. Instead, it was like watching puzzle pieces I'd been trying to force together finally align themselves into a clear picture. The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply after his promotion, the way he'd been distant during our wedding planning, leaving decisions to me because he trusted my judgment. My vision tunneled until all I could see was Daniel's face, the face I'd woken up to for 3 years, the face I'd agreed to see every morning for the rest of my life just 2 hours ago. "How long?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Charlotte, please." "How long?" Daniel swallowed hard. 14 months. 14 months. Nearly half our engagement. While I was selecting invitations and cake flavors, meeting with florists and DJs, he had been building a parallel life with another woman. Olivia stood beside him, triumph written across her features. She'd gotten what she came for, to destroy my perfect day, to stake her claim. What she didn't know was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life, because Rosewood Estate wasn't just our wedding venue. It was mine. Every crystal chandelier, every marble tile, every piece of silverware currently being used to serve our guests belonged to me. The venue had been my grandmother's final gift, transferred into my name 6 months ago when she moved to her villa in the south of France. Neither Daniel nor Olivia knew this. They were about to find out. I turned to Daniel, a cold calm settling over me. 14 months. That's interesting. About the same time you suggested we book this venue for our wedding. He nodded, confused by my change in topic. You always said you loved this place. I thought it would make you happy. It does make me happy, I replied, taking a sip of my champagne. Do you know what else makes me happy? Owning it? Daniel's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? Rosewood Estate. It's mine. My grandmother transferred ownership to me 6 months ago as an early wedding gift. I smiled at Olivia, whose smug expression was beginning to falter. Everything you're enjoying tonight, the champagne in your glass, the canapes being passed around, the chairs you've been sitting on, it all belongs to me. They stared at me in stunned silence. Charlotte, Daniel finally said, what does that have to do with anything? Everything, I replied. Because in about 30 seconds, I'm going to have security escort you both out of my property. Olivia laughed, though it sounded forced. You can't do that. This is your wedding. What will people think? They'll think exactly what I tell them to think, I said, glancing around at our guests, his colleagues from the prestigious law firm where he was gunning for a partner, his family with their old money and older expectations. That my husband has been having an affair with his colleague for over a year, and that I found out on our wedding day when she showed up uninvited to gloat. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The color drained from Daniel's face. Charlotte, you're not thinking clearly. Let's go somewhere and talk this through. Think about what this will do to my career. I am thinking very clearly, I replied. For the first time in 14 months, actually. I raised my hand slightly, catching the attention of Marcus, the head of security, who had been with Rosewood since my grandmother's time. He approached immediately. Miss Charlotte? He asked, pointedly using my maiden name. Marcus, please escort Mr. Reynolds and Ms. Martinez off the premises. They're no longer welcome here. Marcus nodded, no questions asked. He'd always been loyal to my family. You can't do this, Daniel hissed, panic rising in his voice. Think about what you're throwing away. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man I'd fallen in love with, but a stranger who had been deceiving me while I planned our future. I'm not throwing away anything of value, I said, removing my wedding ring and placing it in his palm. You did that a year ago. As security approached, I turned to address our nearest guests, whose attention had been drawn by the unfolding drama. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice carrying across the now quieting room. I'm afraid I have an announcement to make. The celebration will continue, but it's no longer a wedding reception. Consider it a party to celebrate new beginnings, specifically mine. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Marcus and another security guard flanked Daniel and Olivia. You'll regret this, Daniel said, his face contorted with anger and embarrassment as he was led away. You're making a scene. No, I corrected. Him. I'm making an exit. You're the one making a scene. As they were escorted toward the doors, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my best friend, Zoe, who had been watching the confrontation from a distance. Charlotte, what's happening? Why are they taking Daniel away? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the first of many explanations I would give that night. It seems I married a man who's been having an affair for the past year, I said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. And his mistress just crashed our wedding to tell me all about it. The gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. I watched as Daniel and Olivia disappeared through the grand double doors, cast out of the fantasy wedding they had both helped create, one through active planning, the other through active deception. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of what I had in store for them, because while they had been sneaking around behind my back, I had inadvertently been building the perfect stage for their downfall. I turned back to the stunned crowd, the champagne flute raised high. Now, who's ready for some cake? As the double. Doors closed behind Daniel and Olivia. A moment of surreal silence fell over the section of the ballroom where our drama had unfolded. I stood there, still in my wedding dress, aware that all eyes were turning toward me. This wasn't how I had imagined spending the evening of my wedding day, but then again, nothing about this day was turning out as planned. Zoe squeezed my hand. What do you need right now? I took a deep breath. Get me Gregory Walsh. Gregory was my grandmother's attorney who had handled the transfer of Rosewood Estate to my name. He was also, conveniently, a guest at my wedding. While Zoe went to find him, I walked to the center of the ballroom, gesturing for the string quartet to pause. The microphone that had been set up for toasts was waiting. First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. As some of you may have witnessed, I've just learned that my husband, my husband of 2 hours, has been having an affair with his colleague for the past 14 months. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Daniel's mother, Victoria Reynolds, a woman who had never quite approved of me despite my family's social standing, looked like she might faint. I understand this puts many of you in an awkward position. I continued. Especially those of you who work with Daniel at Reynolds, Blackwell, and Morgan. I spotted several of the partners from Daniel's law firm shifting uncomfortably. Please know that you're welcome to stay and enjoy the evening. After all, the food is paid for, the band is here, and the champagne is excellent. Or you may leave, if you feel that's appropriate. Either way, I understand. I took a moment to scan the room, meeting confused and sympathetic gazes. What I won't be doing is hiding in shame or pretending this didn't happen. Daniel made his choice, and now I'm making mine. From the corner of my eye, I saw Gregory approaching Zoe. Perfect timing. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some business to attend to. Please, enjoy the reception. Consider it a party celebrating new beginnings. I handed the microphone to the bewildered DJ and made my way to Gregory, who looked concerned but not entirely surprised. At 65, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind his glasses, Gregory Walsh had seen enough wealthy family drama to last several lifetimes. Charlotte, he said quietly, Zoe tells me there's been a development. That's putting it mildly, I replied, leading him to a quiet corner. I need to know exactly what legal rights I have regarding Daniel and the estate since we're technically married. Gregory's expression turned serious. Let's discuss this in the estate office. The office was tucked away down a private corridor, a room my grandmother had used to manage Rosewood's affairs. It still held her energy, tasteful antiques mixed with modern efficiency, the scent of leather-bound books and subtle perfume lingering in the air. As soon as the door closed behind us, I kicked off my wedding heels and sank into my grandmother's chair. "Start talking, Gregory. Tell me where I stand." Gregory settled into the chair opposite the desk. "The prenuptial agreement we drafted is exceptionally solid. Your grandmother insisted on it, as you'll recall. Daniel signed it, acknowledging that any property you owned prior to the marriage would remain solely yours." "And Rosewood?" "Rosewood estate was transferred to you 6 months ago, well before today's wedding. It's unequivocally your property." He paused. "However, given that you are legally married, albeit for only a few hours, we should file for annulment immediately. The grounds of fraud or misrepresentation would apply given the circumstances." I nodded, feeling the first hint of tears threatening. I blinked them away. "He was with her last night, Gregory. The night before our wedding." Gregory's professional demeanor softened slightly. "I'm truly sorry, Charlotte. Your grandmother would be furious." That almost made me smile. Evelyn Winters had been a force of nature, building a hospitality empire after my grandfather's death, raising me after my parents' accident when I was 12, and teaching me that the world belonged to those brave enough to claim their place in it. "What would she do?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Gregory actually chuckled. "She'd make them regret ever crossing a Winters woman." I stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the estate gardens, where just hours ago, Daniel and I had exchanged vows under a floral arch that had taken 3 days to construct. Daniel doesn't just stand to lose me. This scandal could cost him the partnership he's been chasing. The Reynolds family values their reputation above all else. I turned back to Gregory. And Olivia Martinez clearly thought she was making a power play tonight. She didn't realize who she was dealing with. "What are you planning, Charlotte?" I walked to my grandmother's liquor cabinet, pouring 2 fingers of her favorite scotch. "First, I'm going to make sure every influential person in that ballroom knows exactly what kind of man Daniel Reynolds is. His family, his colleagues, his clients, they'll all know. The firm won't appreciate that. The firm should have thought about that before one of their rising stars decided to conduct an affair with a colleague and humiliate his new wife at their wedding." Gregory didn't argue. "And after tonight?" I sipped the scotch, letting it burn down my throat. "After tonight, I'm going to remind Daniel exactly what he's lost. Not just a wife, but access to Rosewood and everything that comes with the Winters. Name." "That's not all he's lost," came a voice from the doorway. I turned to see Richard Morgan, the managing partner of Reynolds, Blackwell and Morgan, standing there. A tall man in his 60s with the weathered face of someone who'd won more battles than he'd lost. Richard had been my grandmother's friend for decades. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, stepping into the office. "Your friend Zoe mentioned you were here with Gregory." "Richard," I nodded. "I assume you witnessed what happened." "Enough to understand the situation." He closed the door behind him. Daniel was up for partnership next month, was being the operative word. I raised an eyebrow. That seems rather decisive. Richard moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "The Reynolds name may be on our letterhead, but that's mostly historical at this point. Daniel's father hasn't actively practiced in years. The firm's reputation is what matters most to our clients, and what I just witnessed out there," he shook his head, "is not the behavior of someone with the judgment required of a partner at our firm." "And Olivia Martinez?" I asked. "Will be asked to tender her resignation first thing Monday morning. Fraternization between associates and partners is against firm policy for precisely these reasons. The fact that they chose to make it so public only compounds the issue." I hadn't expected allies so quickly, but I shouldn't have been surprised. My grandmother had built connections throughout Boston's elite circles for decades. Those connections were now mine. Thank you for telling me this, Richard. He turned back to face me. Evelyn was one of my dearest friends. She would expect no less. He paused. For what it's worth, Charlotte, I'm sorry. You deserved better than this. After Richard left, Gregory and I spent the next half hour drafting the framework for the annulment filing. We agreed to meet at his office first thing Monday morning to formalize everything. What will you do now? Gregory asked as we prepared to return to the reception. Tonight, I mean. I straightened my wedding dress, checked my makeup in the small mirror on the wall. Despite everything, I still looked like a bride, just one without a groom. Now, I said, opening the office door, I'm going to go back out there and host the most memorable non-wedding reception Boston has ever seen. And tomorrow, I will start planning exactly how Daniel and Olivia will learn what it means to underestimate a winter's woman. As we walked back toward the ballroom, I could hear the music playing again, laughter and conversation floating through the air. My wedding day had imploded spectacularly, but as my grandmother always said, a crisis is just an opportunity to wear a convincing disguise. I intended to make the most of this opportunity. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of my grandmother's study, where I had spent the night on the plush leather sofa rather than returning to the penthouse I had shared with Daniel. I hadn't been able to face that space yet, filled with wedding gifts, photos of us together, and the lingering scent of his cologne. My wedding dress hung over a nearby chair, the Marchesa gown now a six-figure memento of the shortest marriage in Winter's family history. I had changed into clothes Zoe brought me, comfortable loungewear that felt incongruous with the antique, furnishings surrounding me but perfectly suited my emotional state. The reception had continued until nearly 2 a.m., transforming from a wedding celebration into something more cathartic, a gathering of supporters. Most of Daniel's family had left shortly after his ejection, his mother Victoria shooting me a glacial stare on her way out. But to my surprise, his sister Isabel had stayed, pulling me aside to whisper, I always knew he didn't deserve you. My phone buzzed again, the 23rd time since sunrise. I finally picked it up, scrolling through the notifications. 16 missed calls from Daniel. 7 text messages ranging from apologetic to angry. The most recent read, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. You can't just throw away our marriage because of one mistake. One mistake. As if 14 months of deception could be condensed into a single error in judgment. A gentle knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Elena, Rosewood's longtime housekeeper, entered with a tray of coffee and pastries. Ms. Charlotte, you should eat something, she said, setting the tray on the desk. She had been calling me Miss Charlotte since I was 12, and the familiarity of it was comforting now. Thank you, Elena, I said, accepting the coffee. Has there been any disturbance this morning? She understood my meaning immediately. Mr. Reynolds tried to enter the grounds about an hour ago. Security turned him away, as instructed. I nodded, sipping the coffee. And the press? 2 news vans at the main gate. Mr. Walsh called to say there's been some chatter online about what happened last night. He's monitoring it. Of course there was. With both our families' social standing, a wedding day scandal was too juicy to ignore. I could already imagine the headlines. Winter's heiress humiliated at altar, or Reynolds Sion's affair exposed at wedding. Thank you, Elena. Please let me know if anything changes. After she left, I opened my laptop. Sure enough, Boston's social pages were already buzzing. Someone had managed to take a photo of Daniel and Olivia being escorted out of Rosewood, his face a mask of rage, her red dress a splash of color against the night. The photo had gone viral within hours. What intrigued me, however, were the comments beneath the articles. While some revealed in the drama, many expressed support for me, particularly women who saw the situation as a cautionary tale of male entitlement. Winter's revenge was already trending locally. It wasn't the kind of fame I had ever sought, but I couldn't deny its potential usefulness. My phone rang again. Zoe this time. I answered immediately. "Hey, how are you holding up?" Her voice was gentle. "Concerned. Better than expected," I replied honestly. "How's damage control going?" Zoe, who ran one of Boston's premier PR firms, had insisted on handling the public relations aspect of my implosion of a wedding. "I've drafted a statement for your approval. Simple, dignified, but doesn't let Daniel off the hook. And I've been fielding calls from journalists all morning." "Any particularly worrying angles?" "Just one. Olivia Martinez is apparently trying to shop her side of the story. Claims Daniel promised to leave you months ago but kept stalling." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Let her talk. It only makes them both look worse." "That's my girl," Zoe said approvingly. "Also, you should know that several of Daniel's clients have already called my office trying to get in touch with you." That was interesting. "What do they want?" "To jump ship, I think. The Winter's name carries more weight than Reynolds in this town, especially after last night." I contemplated this development. My grandmother had built Winter's Hospitality Group into one of the largest luxury venue and hotel companies on the East Coast. Rosewood Estate was just the crown jewel in a portfolio that included properties from Maine to Florida. The Reynolds family, while respected in legal circles, couldn't match our influence or reach. "Tell them I'll be taking meetings starting Wednesday," I decided. "And Zoe, make sure Daniel knows about it." She chuckled. "With pleasure." After hanging up, I forced myself to eat a croissant while scrolling through emails. One in particular caught my attention, from Olivia Martinez, sent at 5:43 a.m. "Charlotte, we should meet. There are things about Daniel you don't know. Things that happened before last night. This isn't as simple as you think. I'm at the Harbor Hotel until tomorrow. Room 412. Olivia." I stared at the message, trying to decipher its tone. Was it a trap? A genuine attempt at, what, reconciliation? Unlikely. A power play? Possibly. Or perhaps she was already realizing that her actions had consequences beyond the momentary satisfaction of disrupting my wedding. I forwarded the email to Gregory with a simple question. "Worth hearing what she has to say?" His reply came. Minutes later, "Knowledge is power. Take security with you if you go. A sound strategy." I tucked it away for later consideration. First, I had more pressing matters to attend to. Opening a new browser tab, I logged into the Winter's Hospitality Group system. As a board member and major shareholder, I had access to all our properties' information. Daniel and I had been scheduled to leave for our honeymoon today, 2 weeks at our exclusive resort in the Maldives, a resort that, like Rosewood, belonged to the Winters portfolio. With a few clicks, I canceled our reservation and the private jet that would have taken us there. Then, after a moment's thought, I booked the presidential villa for Zoe instead. She deserved a vacation after handling this mess. My phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. "At least give me my things from the penthouse. I have nothing but the tux I was wearing yesterday." I smiled coldly at the message. The penthouse was in my name as well. Another gift from my grandmother when I turned 25. Daniel had moved in after our engagement, bringing his designer suits and collection of luxury watches. He seemed to have forgotten that detail in the chaos of the past 18 hours. "Your items will be packed and delivered to your parents' house by the end of the week," I texted back. "Any attempt to enter the penthouse before then will be considered trespassing." His response was immediate. "This is ridiculous, Charlotte. You can't just erase 2 people's lives together in a day." "You're right," I replied. "It took you 14 months of lying to do that." I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. Despite my composed exterior, the pain was still raw, a persistent ache beneath the anger and determination. I loved Daniel, had built my future around a shared vision that had apparently been a mirage. Another knock at the door. This time it was Marcus, the head of security. Ms. Winters, Mr. Reynolds is at the south gate again. He's becoming insistent. I sighed, standing up. Show me the security feed. Marcus led me to the small monitoring room adjacent to the study. On one of the screens, I could see Daniel's Aston Martin parked haphazardly by the ornate iron gates that marked Rosewood's south entrance. He was arguing with a security guard, gesturing wildly. Even through the soundless feed, his frustration was palpable. He's demanding to speak with you, Marcus explained. Says he won't leave until you agree to 5 minutes of conversation. I studied the screen, noting Daniel's disheveled appearance, still in yesterday's clothes, his hair a mess, so unlike his usual polished self. Good. Let him feel unmoored for once. Tell him I'll speak to him for exactly 3 minutes, I decided. But not at the gate. Have him escorted to the garden pavilion, and make sure he understands that if he deviates from the path or attempts to enter the main house, he'll be removed. Immediately. Marcus nodded. And would you like a security present during your conversation? No need. He's angrier than dangerous. I paused, but stay within earshot. 20 minutes later, I walked across the manicured lawn toward the garden pavilion, a white marble structure surrounded by rose bushes that was often used for intimate wedding ceremonies. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel was pacing inside, stopping abruptly when he saw me approach. He had loosened his bow tie, and his formerly crisp tuxedo shirt was wrinkled beyond repair. Charlotte, he began, taking a step toward me. I held up my hand. Stay where you are. Your 3 minutes start now. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This is insane. We were married yesterday. We took vows. Vows you had already broken before you spoke them, I pointed out, keeping my voice level. What do you want, Daniel? I want to explain. What Olivia did, showing up like that, was completely inappropriate. Yes, we had a relationship, but it was ending. I chose you. I almost laughed. You chose me? After sleeping with her the night before our wedding? That's your defense? He had the decency to look ashamed, at least. It was a mistake. A goodbye that got out of hand. What we have, what we've built together, it's worth more than that one error in judgment. 2 minutes left, I said coldly. Use them wisely. Daniel's expression hardened. Fine. Let's talk about practicalities then. I need access to the penthouse. My clothes, my personal items, my files for work, already being packed. They'll be delivered to your parents' house. I'm not staying with my parents. I'm 34. Years old, for God's sake. I shrugged. That sounds like a problem. Not a problem for me, problem. His face flushed with anger. And what about the honeymoon? The deposits? The arrangements? Cancelled. Though you're welcome to try booking the Winters Resort in the Maldives yourself. I hear they're very selective about their guests these days. That landed as intended. Daniel's jaw clenched as the reality of his situation began to sink in. He wasn't just losing me. He was losing access to everything that came with being a part of the Winters family. 1 minute, I noted. Charlotte, please. His tone softened, becoming the voice I had fallen in love with years ago. We can work through this. Couples therapy, time apart, whatever you need, but don't throw away everything we've built on impulse. I studied him, the man I had planned to spend my life with. In another world, his words might have moved me. But that world had shattered the moment Olivia Martinez walked into our wedding reception in her red dress. What we built, I said quietly, was founded on a lie. Your time is up, Daniel. As if on cue, Marcus appeared at the edge of the pavilion. Mr. Reynolds, I'll escort you back to your vehicle now. Daniel's face hardened again. This isn't over. Charlotte, I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Actually, it is, but the consequences are just beginning. I turned and walked away, not bothering to watch as security escorted him off the property. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text. From Gregory confirming our meeting tomorrow to file for annulment. A chapter was ending, but I was already plotting the next one. And in this version of the story, I wouldn't be the one caught by surprise. The Harbor Hotel was one of Boston's newer luxury establishments, a sleek, glass-fronted building overlooking the waterfront. It wasn't part of the Winters portfolio, which made it neutral territory for this meeting. Perhaps that's why Olivia had chosen it. I sat in the back of my town car, staring at the hotel entrance while my driver waited for instructions. After deliberating for most of the day, I had decided to take Gregory's advice and hear what Olivia Martinez had to say. Knowledge was indeed power, and right now, I needed every advantage. "Wait here," I told my driver. "I shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. I had dressed strategically for this encounter, a tailored black pantsuit that projected authority, subtle makeup, and my grandmother's platinum and diamond watch. No wedding ring, of course. That had been locked away in my safe at Rosewood. The hotel lobby was bustling with Monday afternoon business travelers. I bypassed the front desk and headed straight for the elevators, thankful that the reflective doors showed no trace of the turmoil I felt inside. Room 412, fourth floor, likely overlooking the harbor, one of their better accommodations, though not quite a suite. I knocked precisely 3 times. The door opened almost immediately, as if Olivia had been waiting just on the other side. She looked different than she had at the wedding. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dressed in jeans and a cashmere sweater, her face free of makeup, more approachable, more vulnerable. I wasn't buying it for a second. "Charlotte," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I didn't think you'd come." Curiosity got the better of me, I replied coolly. "You have 15 minutes. She stepped aside to let me enter. The room was indeed harbor-facing, with floor-to-ceiling windows that would normally offer a spectacular view. Today, heavy rain obscured the scenery, turning the world outside into a gray blur. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" She gestured awkwardly to the room's minibar. "This isn't a social call, Olivia. You said there were things about Daniel I didn't know. I'm here to listen, not to bond." She nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed while I remained standing, arms crossed. "First," she began, "I want to apologize for how I approached things at your wedding. It was cruel and unnecessary. I was angry." 14 minutes, I replied, glancing at my grandmother's watch. Olivia sighed. "I deserve that, but what I'm about to tell you isn't about hurting you further. It's about making sure you understand who Daniel really is." She reached for her phone on the nightstand, unlocking it and scrolling through what appeared to be text messages. "Daniel and I didn't just have an affair," she continued. "We had a relationship, one that started before he ever met you." That caught me off guard. "Daniel and I have been together for 3 years. He told me he'd only known you for 18 months. He lied. We've been involved on and off for nearly 5 years. We met during law school." She handed me her phone. "These are screenshots of conversations going back to when he first told me about you." I took the phone, scanning through the messages. There were dozens of them, spanning years. In the earlier ones, Daniel referred to me as his ticket into the Winters fortune. In later messages, he detailed plans to secure the relationship, while keeping Olivia on the side. My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral as I continued scrolling. One message from a year ago read, "Wedding planning is a nightmare, but worth it for access to her family's connections. Just need to play the devoted fiancé a bit longer." I handed the phone back to Olivia, my mind racing to process this new information. "Why show me this now? Why not before the wedding?" "I tried," she said, and for the first time, I detected genuine emotion in her voice. "3 times I came close to contacting you. Each time, Daniel convinced me that he was just stringing you along. that eventually he would leave you for me. The night before your wedding, he swore it would be the last time. We'd have to hide. But you didn't believe him. She shook her head. Something felt different. He was too final about it. So I checked his email while he was in the shower. Her voice hardened. He had already booked a romantic getaway with another woman for next month. Not you. Not me. Someone else entirely. The revelation shouldn't have shocked me after everything else, but it did. The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. Who? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jessica Harding, an associate at Montgomery and Phillips. The name was familiar, a rival firm that often faced off against Reynolds, Blackwell, and Morgan in court. The pieces were falling into place. Industrial espionage, I murmured. He's been sleeping with women at competing firms. Olivia nodded grimly. It's his pattern. He did it at his previous firm too. Uses women to gain inside information, then leverages it for his cases. It's how he's risen so quickly despite being mediocre at actual law. I moved to the window, staring out at the rain-blurred harbor. My mind was calculating, connecting dots I should have seen long ago. The convenient case insights Daniel would suddenly have. The competitors who mysteriously made critical errors when facing him in court. His insistence on handling certain clients personally. Why should I believe you? I asked, turning back to face her. This could be an elaborate attempt to hurt him or me, even further. She reached into the nightstand drawer and pulled out a USB drive. Because I copied everything. Emails, text messages, photos, even recorded conversations where he discusses his strategy. It's all here. I made no move to take it. And what do you want in exchange for this information? Money? Revenge? Nothing from you? Olivia replied, setting the drive on the desk. Consider it a peace offering. What you do with it is your business. I studied her, trying to discern her true motivations. You're out of a job because of what happened. The firm is forcing your resignation. She smiled thinly. Actually, I submitted my resignation this morning. I start at the district attorney's office next month. I've been planning my exit from Reynolds Blackwell for a while. That was unexpected. The DA's office? That's quite a change of direction. Not really. I've always been more interested in prosecution than corporate law. Daniel knew that. It's partly why he targeted me. Thought I might provide insight into the DA's strategies. I finally took a seat in the armchair by the window, processing everything. If what you're saying is true, Daniel hasn't just been unfaithful. He's been engaging in potentially criminal behavior. Professional misconduct at minimum, Olivia agreed. Grounds for disbarment if it can be proven, which it can be, with that drive. I glanced at the USB. Such a small object with such destructive potential. Why didn't you go directly to the bar association yourself? I asked. Olivia looked down, a flush creeping up her neck. Because I was complicit. I shared information I shouldn't have. I believed we were in love, and that once he left you, we'd build a life together. She laughed bitterly. I was as much a fool as anyone. The rain intensified outside, pattering against the windows. I found myself believing her. Despite everything, the humiliation in her eyes was too raw to be feigned. We're not the first, she continued. There was a woman at his previous firm in New York, Emily something. He did the same thing to her, dated her while using her to gain information on cases, then discarded her when he moved to Boston. And the woman showed up at his office, causing a scene. I finished, remembering a story Daniel had told me about a crazy ex who couldn't accept their breakup. He told me she was unstable. He would. Olivia stood, moving to the minibar to pour herself a glass of water. Daniel has a talent for rewriting history to make himself the hero, or at least the victim. I thought about the prenuptial agreement my grandmother had insisted upon, despite Daniel's objections. About her cryptic comment that Men who resist prenups often have more to hide than their assets. She had seen something in him that I had been too blinded by love to notice. "He's been calling and texting me nonstop since last night," I said, not entirely sure why I was sharing this with her. Alternating between apologies and demands. Classic Daniel. He hates losing control of a situation. She hesitated. "You should know. He might not be as financially stable as he appears. He has gambling debts, significant ones." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His eagerness to access my family's wealth and connections. His desperation to make partner. I stood, having heard enough. "Thank you for this information, Olivia. Misguided as your methods were, I believe you thought you were doing the right thing by coming to my wedding." She looked surprised at my shift, in tone. "So you don't hate me?" "Oh, I'm still angry about how you chose to deliver the news," I clarified. "But I'm beginning to see that Daniel manipulated us both." I picked up the USB drive. "And now, thanks to you, I have everything I need to ensure he can never do this to anyone else." As I moved toward the door, Olivia called after me. "What are you going to do with that information?" I paused, hand on the doorknob. "That depends on Daniel. I believe in proportional responses." "Meaning?" "Meaning if he accepts the annulment quietly and disappears from my life. Perhaps this stays between us. If he chooses to make things difficult." I shrugged. "Then Boston's legal community learns exactly who Daniel Reynolds really is." Back in my car, I examined the USB drive, turning it over in my fingers. I wasn't naive enough to trust Olivia completely, but her story aligned with too many inconsistencies I'd noticed in Daniel's behavior over the years. The way he sometimes knew things about cases he shouldn't have. The convenient coincidences that always seemed to work in his favor. I called Gregory. "I need a computer forensics expert. Someone discreet." "May I ask why?" he inquired, though his tone suggested he already had a good idea. "I've received some information about Daniel that needs verification. Files, emails, possibly recordings. I'll have someone meet you at my office in an hour." He paused. "Charlotte, whatever you're planning." "Don't worry, Gregory. I'm my grandmother's granddaughter. I understand the value of patience and precision." As my car pulled away from the Harbor Hotel, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was being channeled into something more productive. A determination to see justice done. Not just for me, but for all. The women Daniel had used as stepping stones in his career. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "We need to talk about the annulment. My lawyer will be contacting yours." So he was lawyering up. Interesting. I sent back a single response. "Choose your next steps carefully, Daniel. You have more to lose than you realize." Then I silenced my phone and watched the rain-soaked city pass by outside the window. The game had changed. And this time, I knew all the players. Gregory Walsh's office occupied the top floor of a historic brick building in Boston's financial district. Unlike the sleek, modern law firms that dominated the area, Walsh & Associates maintained an old-world aesthetic, dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and oriental rugs that had likely cost more than most people's cars. I sat in Gregory's private conference room, watching as Julian Chen, the computer forensics expert, methodically examined the contents of Olivia's USB drive. Julian was a former FBI cybersecurity specialist who now ran his own consulting firm. According to Gregory, he was the best in the business and completely discreet. "This is extensive," Julian commented, eyes fixed on his laptop screen. "Whoever compiled this was very thorough." "What exactly are we looking at?" Gregory asked, standing behind Julian to view the monitor. "Emails, text message backups, photos, voice recordings, even financial records." Julian clicked through several folders. "All appear to be authentic based on metadata and digital signatures, though I'll need more time to verify everything completely." Leaned forward. How damaging is it? Julian looked up, his expression grave. If you're asking from a legal ethics perspective, career-ending. There's clear evidence of Mr. Reynolds using relationships to gain privileged information about cases and opposing counsel strategies. Gregory whistled softly. The Bar Association would have a field day with this. Disbarment would be the minimum consequence. And from a criminal perspective? I pressed. Julian hesitated. Some of these communications could potentially constitute corporate espionage, especially those related to confidential client information. It would depend on how the information was used. Gregory placed a hand on my shoulder. Charlotte, you need to think carefully about how to proceed. Using this information carries significant responsibility and risk. I nodded, understanding his concern. I'm not looking to destroy anyone unnecessarily, but I do need protection, and I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Julian continued scrolling through files. There's something else here you should see. He opened a folder labeled Financial and clicked on a spreadsheet. These appear to be records of gambling debts, significant ones, and communications with less than reputable lenders. I scanned the numbers, my stomach sinking. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars owed to entities with names like Coastal Investments and Summit Holdings, which even I recognized as fronts for loan sharks. He's been borrowing from criminal organizations, I murmured, the full picture becoming clearer. That's why he was so desperate to marry me, to access my trust fund. Gregory's expression darkened. This puts things in a new light. If he's involved with these people, there could be more at stake than just his career. A memory surfaced. Daniel's insistence 6 months ago that we combine our finances after the wedding. His casual suggestion that my trust fund could be put to better use through investments he knew about. I had resisted, citing my grandmother's advice to always maintain financial independence, even in marriage. I want everything verified, I told Julian. Every email, every recording, every financial record. And I want to know who these lenders really are. Julian nodded. I'll need a few days to be thorough. You have until Friday, I replied, standing up. In the meantime, Gregory, I need you to reach out to Daniel's attorney. Tell them I'm amenable to discussing terms for the annulment, but make no specific offers yet. Gregory raised an eyebrow. Playing for time? Precisely. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with before showing my hand. As Julian packed up his equipment, my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Call me ASAP. You need to see what just hit. Social media. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway to call her back. What's happening? I asked without a preamble. Daniel's gone public, Zoe replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. He's posted a statement on Instagram portraying himself as the victim of a hasty misunderstanding that's been blown out of proportion by outside forces. My blood ran cold. Show me. She texted a screenshot. Daniel's post included a photo of us from our engagement party, looking blissfully happy. The caption read, In light of recent events, I feel compelled to address the rumors circulating about my marriage. What should have been a private matter between me and my wife has been distorted by those who seek to drive us apart. While I made a serious error in judgment, the portrayal of events has been grossly exaggerated. I remain committed to working through this with Charlotte and hope that everyone will respect our privacy during this difficult time. Truth matters. Standing strong. He's trying to control the narrative, I said, leaning against the wall as I processed this new development, making it sound like I overreacted to a minor indiscretion. It gets worse, Zoe continued. Check the comments. His family and friends are rallying around him, painting you as unstable and vindictive. Victoria Reynolds is particularly vocal. I scrolled through the comments, my jaw clenching as I read Victoria's contribution. Some women simply can't handle the pressures of being part of an established family. My son deserves someone who understands forgiveness and loyalty. How would you like to respond? Zoe asked. We should get ahead of this before his version becomes the accepted story. I considered my options, thinking about the USB drive and its damning contents. No direct response yet. But leak to your media contacts that sources close to Charlotte Winters indicate there's more to the story than a simple indiscretion. Much more. Hint that evidence exists, but don't specify what kind. Creating intrigue. Smart. It'll undermine his clean-cut victim narrative without showing our full hand. Exactly. And Zoe? Have someone monitor his family's financial activities. I suspect the Reynolds might be more desperate for my family's money than they've let on. After ending the call, I returned to the conference room where Gregory was waiting. Alone, Julian having departed with the USB drive. Daniel's gone public with his version of events, I informed him, showing him the Instagram post. He's portraying himself as the repentant husband blindsided by an overreaction. Gregory studied the post, his expression hardening. A predictable move. He's trying to shape public opinion while appealing to your desire to avoid scandal. Doesn't know me very well if he thinks that's my primary concern. What's your next move? I paced the room, thinking through my strategy. We proceed with the annulment filing as planned, but we hold back on mentioning the evidence from the USB drive for now. Let him think this is just about the affair with Olivia. A tactical restraint. Gregory nodded approvingly. Your grandmother would approve. The mention of my grandmother brought a faint smile to my lips. Evelyn Winters had built her empire by outthinking her competitors, seeing 3 moves ahead while they focused on the immediate play. I needed to channel that same strategic patience now. There's something else, I said, stopping my pacing. I want to look into the Reynolds family finances. Daniel's gambling debts are significant, but I'm beginning to wonder if they're just the tip of the iceberg. His father retired early from the firm, supposedly to enjoy life, but the timing always seemed abrupt. Gregory leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. I can discreetly inquire with some contacts in financial circles. The Reynolds have always projected wealth, but appearances can be deceiving. And I want to speak with Richard Morgan again. If Daniel was using relationships to gain inside information on cases, the firm needs to know the extent of the damage. Tread carefully there, Charlotte. Once you share that information with the firm, you can't control what they do with it. I nodded, understanding the implications. Revealing Daniel's actions to his firm could trigger a cascade of consequences: internal investigations, client notifications, potential lawsuits. It would be the professional equivalent of a nuclear option. I'll wait for Julian's complete analysis before approaching Richard, I agreed. In the meantime, I need to address another aspect of this situation, which is, Rosewood Estate had several events booked through Daniel's connections: client gatherings, firm retreats, family functions. I need to decide whether to honor those commitments or cancel them. Gregory considered this. Canceling could be seen as petty, but honoring them means continuing a relationship with people who are currently undermining you publicly. I smiled grimly. Or it provides the perfect opportunity to show the influential members of Boston society exactly who owns Rosewood and who they should maintain good relations with if they want to continue enjoying its privileges. Understanding dawned in Gregory's eyes. You're going to host these events yourself. With impeccable hospitality and a subtle reminder of where the power in this situation truly lies. I checked my watch. The Reynolds family has their annual charitable foundation dinner scheduled at Rosewood next month. I think I'll personally oversee the arrangements. As we wrapped up our meeting, finalizing the details for the annulment filing, I felt a strange sense of clarity emerging from the chaos of the past 2 days. Daniel had treated our relationship as a chess game, methodically positioning pieces to achieve his desired outcome. What he hadn't realized was that he was playing against someone who had learned strategy from a true master. My phone buzzed with another notification. A direct message from Olivia. He's contacting everyone who was at the wedding, spinning his version of events. Thought you should know? I wasn't surprised. It was the desperate move of someone watching their carefully constructed facade crumble. Gregory, I said as we walked toward the elevator, add a confidentiality clause to the annulment agreement. Any public statements about our relationship or the events of the wedding must be approved by both parties. He'll resist that. Let him. Every point he contests gives us another opportunity to mention what we know. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished brass wall panel. I looked different somehow. Harder, more focused, less the blushing bride, and more my grandmother's heir in every sense of the word. Daniel had wanted access to the Winters' fortune and influence. He was about to discover the full weight of both, but not in the way he had planned. 3 days. After my meeting with Gregory, I stood in my grandmother's study at Rosewood, reviewing the preliminary report Julian Chen had compiled. The contents were even more damning than I had anticipated. Daniel hadn't just crossed ethical lines. He had obliterated them with calculated precision. "Ms. Winters," Elena called from the doorway, "Mr. Morgan has arrived." I closed the folder and placed it in the desk drawer. "Thank you, Elena. Please show him in and bring us some coffee." Richard Morgan entered a moment later, looking every bit the distinguished attorney in his tailored navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses. At 65, he still commanded respect throughout Boston's legal community, not just for his courtroom skills, but for his unwavering ethical standards. It was part of why I had decided to trust him with what I'd discovered. "Charlotte," he greeted me warmly, taking the seat I offered across from the desk. "You're looking well, all things considered." "Appearances can be deceiving," I replied with a small smile. "But I'm managing." Elena returned with coffee, setting the silver service on the desk before discreetly withdrawing. "I appreciate you meeting me here rather than at your office," I said, pouring us each a cup. "What I need to discuss is sensitive." Richard nodded, accepting the coffee. Daniel has been making quite a spectacle of himself. His public appeal for reconciliation has generated significant sympathy in certain circles. I imagine Victoria Reynolds is leading that particular chorus. Indeed, she's been rather vocal at the club. He sipped his coffee. However, those who know you and know your grandmother are reserving judgment. Evelyn was not one to suffer fools, and you've inherited her discernment. I smiled at that. It was perhaps the highest compliment he could offer. Richard, what I'm about to share with you goes beyond marital indiscretion. It directly impacts your firm and potentially your clients. I unlocked the desk drawer and retrieved the folder. I've had this information independently verified by a forensic specialist. I slid the folder across the desk. Richard opened it, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern, to something approaching anger as he scanned the contents. "My God," he murmured, flipping through pages of evidence. This is a systematic pattern of using personal relationships to obtain confidential information from competing firms, I finished for him. "Yes." Richard removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "How did you obtain this?" "Olivia Martinez provided the initial evidence. My specialist verified its authenticity and uncovered additional material." "Does Daniel know you have this?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first, out of respect for your firm and for my grandmother's long relationship with you." Richard continued examining the documents, his legal mind clearly processing the implications. Some of these communications involve active cases, clients who could be significantly compromised. He looked up sharply. "The Westfield merger, the Castleton patent dispute, these are major matters." "I understand the gravity of the situation," I assured him. "That's why I'm bringing this to you directly rather than to the Bar Association. You deserve the opportunity to protect your firm and your clients before this becomes public." He closed the folder, his expression grave. "You realize this will And Daniel's legal career. Even without formal disbarment, no reputable firm would touch him after this. I do. And if it were merely a personal betrayal, I might be inclined toward mercy. But this, I gestured to the folder, this affects innocent people, clients who trusted your firm, other attorneys whose confidences were violated. Richard was silent for a long moment, weighing his response. What are you planning to do with this information, Charlotte? That depends partly on Daniel's approach to our annulment. If he agrees to my terms quietly, this information remains private, except for what you need to protect your clients, of course. If he continues his public campaign to portray me as an unreasonable, unforgiving wife, I let the implication hang in the air. Leverage, Richard nodded, understanding perfectly. Evelyn taught you well. She taught me that power isn't about crushing opponents needlessly. It's about ensuring they understand the consequences of their choices. Richard stood, moving to the window that overlooked Rosewood's manicured gardens. There's something else you should know about the Reynolds family. Something that may help explain, though not excuse, Daniel's behavior. I waited, sensing that whatever he was about to share wasn't common knowledge. William Reynolds, Daniel's father, didn't retire by choice 5 years ago. The senior partners, myself included, asked him to step down. Richard turned back to face me. There were irregularities in his handling of client funds. Nothing we could prove definitively, but enough to raise serious concerns. This was unexpected. Financial impropriety? We believe he was borrowing from client accounts to cover personal expenses. When confronted, he agreed to retire rather than face an internal investigation. The firm covered the shortfalls quietly to protect our reputation. The pieces were falling into place, and the Reynolds family has been struggling financially ever since. Richard nodded. William was living beyond his means for years. Vacation homes, private jets, lavish parties. The trappings of success without the substance to support it. When that revenue stream ended, Daniel needed a new source of funds, I concluded. Hence the gambling, the desperate attempts to make partner, and of course, marrying into the Winters' fortune. It appears so. Victoria has been liquidating assets quietly, family heirlooms, art collections. They still maintain appearances, but the foundation is crumbling. I absorbed this new information, feeling an odd mix of vindication and sadness. The Reynolds family had projected wealth and prestige for generations, looking down on others they deemed less established, including at times me, despite my family's considerable fortune. To learn it had been partially a facade was both illuminating and troubling. Thank you for telling me this, Richard. It provides important context. He returned to his seat, his expression serious. What will you do now? I considered my options. Carefully. Regarding the firm, that's your decision. You need to protect your clients and your reputation. As for Daniel and our annulment, I'll proceed as planned, but with this additional understanding of his motivations. Richard nodded, seemingly relieved by my measured response. I should warn you, the Reynolds family won't go down without a fight. Victoria, especially, is fiercely protective of their social standing. I'm counting on it, I replied with a small smile. Which brings me to another matter. The Reynolds Family Foundation dinner is scheduled at Rosewood next month. I assume the firm is still planning to attend? It's our most significant charity event of the year, Richard confirmed, looking slightly uncomfortable. Though, under the circumstances, I wanted to proceed as planned, I said, surprising him. With one modification, I'll be hosting personally. As the owner of Rosewood Estate, understanding dawned in his eyes. A power move. A reminder of reality, I corrected gently. The Boston social world needs to understand that the Winters' name and properties continue regardless of my marital status. And the Reynolds family needs to recognize that burning bridges with me has consequences beyond the personal. Richard Boy. actually chuckled. Evelyn would be proud. She always said the most effective demonstrations of power are the ones that appear effortlessly gracious. As our meeting concluded and I walked Richard to the door, he paused to examine a photograph. On the side table, my grandmother in her prime, standing proudly in front of Rosewood Estate on its opening day. "She built all this from nothing, you know," he said softly. "After your grandfather died, leaving her with significant debt, everyone expected her to sell the family properties and live quietly on whatever remained. Instead, she transformed a single small hotel into one of the most successful hospitality groups on the East Coast." I nodded, having heard the story many times. "She used to tell me that women are underestimated twice, once for being women, and again for being underestimated the first time." "Use that," Richard advised. "Daniel and his family clearly underestimated you. Let them continue to do so until it's too late for them to recover." After Richard left, I called Zoe to update her on the latest developments. "So the whole Reynolds empire is basically a house of cards?" she asked, sounding both shocked and delighted. "That explains why Victoria has been so aggressively defending Daniel on social media. She's protecting the family name, not just her son." "Exactly. And it gives us another angle for our strategy. Have your contacts discovered anything else about their finances?" "Actually, yes. They've been quietly trying to secure a loan using their family home as collateral. 3 banks have. Turned them down already." That was significant. The Reynolds family mansion in Beacon Hill had been their pride for generations. To risk it as collateral suggested their financial situation was even more dire than Richard had indicated. "One more thing," Zoe added. "Daniel's been reaching out to several of your family's business associates, apparently trying to secure a position somewhere, anywhere, that would give him a foot in the door of Winter's hospitality group." I laughed despite myself. "He's still trying to access my family's money, just through a different route." "Want me to shut that down?" I considered it for a moment. "No, let him continue for now. Each person he approaches is another potential ally for us when they learn the truth." After ending the call, I walked through Rosewood's grand hallways, taking comfort in the familiar surroundings. This estate had been my sanctuary since childhood, the place where my grandmother had raised me after my parents' accident, where she had taught me the subtle arts of business and power. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "My attorney has reviewed your proposed terms. We need to talk in person. Dinner tomorrow?" I stared at the message, noting the shift in tone from his previous communications. No mention of reconciliation or misunderstandings. He had received the annulment terms, generous but firm, and was now pivoting to a more businesslike approach. What he didn't know was how much I had discovered in the past few days. How completely I understood the game he had been playing. "Not dinner," I replied. "Meet me at Rosewood noon tomorrow. We'll discuss terms over lunch. Home field advantage." Another lesson from my grandmother. Daniel's response came quickly. "I'll be there. Thank you for agreeing to meet." I smiled at the false gratitude. He was already preparing his next move, unaware that I was several steps ahead. Tomorrow would be illuminating for both of us, but especially for him. Rosewood's private dining room was set for 2. I had chosen this space deliberately, intimate enough for conversation, but with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate gardens, a constant reminder of exactly where we were meeting and who owned it. The antique mahogany table gleamed in the midday light, set with my grandmother's finest china and silver. A power lunch in every sense of the word. I arrived, early, wearing a cream silk blouse and tailored black pants, my grandmother's sapphire pendant at my throat. Professional but unmistakably expensive. Another subtle reminder of what Daniel was losing. Marcus appeared at the doorway. "Ms. Winters, Mr. Reynolds has arrived. Shall I bring him up?" "Please do," I replied, straightening a fork that was already perfectly aligned. And Marcus? Stay within earshot. I don't anticipate any problems, but… Of course. He nodded, understanding perfectly. When Daniel walked in minutes later, I was struck by the change in his appearance. Gone was the disheveled, desperate man who had confronted me in the garden pavilion days earlier. In his place stood the polished attorney I had fallen in love with, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating confidence. It was all facade, I knew now, but an effective one. "Charlotte," he greeted me, his voice warm as if we were meeting for a regular date. "Thank you for seeing me." I remained seated, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Please, sit. Lunch will be served shortly." He took the offered seat, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the view of the estate grounds. I could almost see him calculating what he had lost access to. "I've been staying with my parents," he offered as if making casual conversation. "It's temporary, of course, until we resolve this situation." "Is that what we're calling it now?" I asked, my voice pleasantly neutral. "A situation?" Daniel had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "I've had time to reflect on my actions. What I did was inexcusable." "Which part? The 14-month affair with Olivia? Sleeping with her the night before our wedding? Or inviting her to the reception to humiliate me publicly?" "I didn't invite her," he said quickly. "She came on her own. I would never have…" "Let's not lie to each other anymore, Daniel. It's a waste of both our time." I sat back as a server entered with the first course, a chilled lobster salad. "You wanted to discuss the annulment terms?" Daniel waited until the server had left before leaning forward. "Charlotte, the terms you're proposing are extreme. I understand you're hurt, but extreme?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking for alimony. I'm not claiming any of your assets. I'm simply requiring a complete separation, a mutual non-disclosure agreement, and your written surrender of any claims to Rosewood Estate or any Winters family properties or businesses." "It's the non-disclosure that concerns me," he admitted. "My career requires a certain public profile, and restricting what I can say about my own marriage is problematic." I took a bite of the salad, savoring the perfectly seasoned lobster before responding. "Your career. Yes, let's talk about that. How is the partnership track looking at Reynolds, Blackwell, and Morgan these days?" His fork paused midway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "I had lunch with Richard Morgan earlier this week. He seemed concerned about some of the firm's cases, particularly those you've been handling personally." Daniel's face remained composed, but I noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. "Richard and I have a strong professional relationship. Any concerns he has, he would discuss with me directly." "Of course," I agreed smoothly. "Though he might be more forthcoming with me, given his long friendship with my grandmother." The server returned with wine, a crisp Sancerre that paired perfectly with the seafood. Daniel waited until we were alone again before speaking. "What exactly are you implying, Charlotte?" I met his gaze directly. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that I know, Daniel. About you. About your family's financial troubles. About how you've been acquiring information from competitors to advance your career." The color drained from his face. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but Jessica Harding at Montgomery and Phillips, Emily Townsend at your previous firm in New York, and of course Olivia Martinez." I kept my voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. "You have a type, don't you? Smart, ambitious women with access to valuable information. Women who believe you love them while you're mining their professional knowledge for your own gain." Daniel set down his fork, his appetite apparently gone. "Those are serious accusations." "They would be if they were merely accusations." I took a sip of wine. "But with evidence, they become facts. Uncomfortable ones, I imagine." What evidence? His voice had lost its smooth confidence. I smiled slightly. The kind that's been verified by a forensic specialist and reviewed by the managing partner of your firm. The kind that could be submitted to the Bar Association, should it become necessary. Daniel's facade cracked then, just for a moment, revealing the panic beneath. Charlotte, whatever you think you have, emails, text messages, voice recordings, financial records tracking your gambling debts. I listed them calmly. Detailed evidence of how you've systematically used relationships to gain confidential information that benefited your cases. Shall I continue? He stared at me, recalculating his position. I could almost see the gears turning as he shifted strategies. What do you want? He asked finally, his voice low. Exactly what's in the annulment agreement. A clean break, your silence, and your explicit recognition that you have no claim to any Winter's assets. And if I agree, then the evidence remains private, except for what Richard Morgan needs to protect the firm's clients, of course. Your career would be damaged, but not destroyed. And if I don't? I set my napkin aside, leaning forward slightly. Then Boston's legal community learns exactly who Daniel Reynolds really is. The Bar Association receives a comprehensive file of your professional misconduct and your family's foundation dinner. Next month will be very awkward indeed. Daniel's expression hardened. You would destroy my career out of spite? No, I would allow your own actions to have their natural consequences. I gestured toward the window, to the estate grounds beyond. My grandmother built this place on principles of integrity and hard work. You sought to exploit her legacy, and me, for your financial gain. Consider yourself fortunate that I'm offering you any path forward at all. The server returned to clear our plates and serve the main course, seared scallops with a saffron risotto. Daniel barely glanced at the why. Food. My parents will fight this, he said after a moment, especially my mother. The Reynolds name is not what it once was, I finished for him. Your father's forced retirement, your mother's quiet selling of family heirlooms, the rejected loan applications using your family home as collateral. I raised an eyebrow at his surprise. Did you think I wouldn't investigate once I realized what you were capable of? Daniel pushed his plate away. This is vindictive. This is business, I corrected him. You approached our relationship as a transaction, a way to access the Winter's fortune and connections. I'm simply concluding that transaction on my terms rather than yours. He stared at me, a mix of anger and something like reluctant respect in his eyes. I didn't think you had this in you. You never really knew me, Daniel. That's the tragedy of it all. I took another sip of wine. You were so focused on what my family could do for you that you never bothered to learn who I actually am. A tense silence fell between us. Outside the window, a gardener was carefully pruning the rose bushes that lined the central pathway, cutting away dead growth to allow the healthy stems to flourish. It seemed fitting. The annulment agreement, Daniel finally said. If I sign, it as written. What assurance do I have that you won't use this evidence anyway? You have my word, I replied simply. Unlike yours, it still means something. His jaw tightened at the barb. I'll need to consult with my attorney. Of course, you have until Friday. I checked my watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other appointments this afternoon. Daniel stood, straightening his tie in a gesture I had once found endearing, but now recognized as a nervous habit. What will you tell people about why our marriage ended? The truth. That you had an ongoing affair, which came to light at our wedding. I rose as well. The rest depends entirely on how you choose to proceed from here. As Marcus appeared to escort Daniel out, I remained by the window, watching as he was led across the grounds toward the main gate. His shoulders were tense, his stride less confident than when he had arrived. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. How did it go? He's cornered and he knows it, I replied. But cornered animals can be dangerous. Keep monitoring the Reynolds family activities. I suspect Victoria may have her own moves to make. As Daniel's figure disappeared from view, I found myself reflecting on the woman I had been just a week ago, excited about my wedding day, convinced I knew the man I was marrying, blind to the machinations happening around me. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone more clear-eyed, more like my grandmother than I had ever expected to become. Elena appeared at the doorway. "Miss Charlotte, Mr. Walsh is on the phone. He says it's important." I nodded, moving back to the table to retrieve my phone. "Put him through to my grandmother's study. I'll take it there." As I walked the familiar hallway toward the study, I wondered what new development Gregory was calling about. Whatever it was, I was ready. Daniel had underestimated me for the last time. Now he, and everyone else involved, would learn exactly what that mistake would cost them. "She's done what?" I gripped the phone tighter, barely containing my shock as Gregory explained the situation. "Victoria Reynolds has filed an injunction attempting to block the annulment," he repeated, his voice grave. "She's claiming you're acting irrationally due to emotional distress, and that the marriage should be given a chance before any legal dissolution is pursued." I sank into my grandmother's leather chair, processing this unexpected development. On what grounds could she possibly intervene in our marriage? She's not a party to it. She's citing her position as trustee of several Reynolds family assets that were promised as wedding gifts, but not yet formally transferred. She's arguing that the annulment would constitute a financial harm to the family's interests. Gregory's tone made it clear what he thought of this legal maneuver. "It's tenuous at best, but it will delay proceedings while the court considers her standing." This is about buying time, I realized. She knows Daniel's position is weak, so she's trying to create leverage elsewhere. Precisely. And there's more. She's scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning. My sources say she intends to position this as a family, trying to save a young marriage from outside influences. I could almost admire the audacity. Victoria Reynolds had always been a formidable social operator, maintaining the family's prestigious image through charm, intimidation, and strategic philanthropy. Now she was deploying those same skills in a last-ditch effort to save not just Daniel's marriage, but the Reynolds family's increasingly precarious financial situation. "Who's representing her?" I asked, already thinking through potential counter-strategies. "Lawrence. Harrington. Of course. Harrington was a family law specialist known for his aggressive tactics and media savvy. He and Victoria had served on several charity boards together over the years. Gregory, I need you to call Judge Eleanor Martinez. She owes my grandmother a favor, and she specializes in family court matters. See if she can expedite a hearing on Victoria's standing before this spirals further." "Already done. We have a hearing scheduled for Monday morning." I could hear papers rustling on his end. "In the meantime, we should prepare a response to Victoria's press conference." "I'll handle that," I replied, an idea taking shape. "Have you heard anything from Daniel since our lunch? His attorney contacted me an hour ago. He was apparently ready to accept our terms before his mother intervened. Now he's wavering." I sighed, unsurprised. Daniel had always deferred to his mother on important matters, a dynamic I had foolishly interpreted as family loyalty rather than the financial dependence it truly was. After ending the call with Gregory, I immediately dialed Zoe. "Victoria Reynolds is making her move," I said without preamble. "Press conference tomorrow morning, positioning this as a family trying to rescue a marriage from outside interference." Zoe whistled. "Bold strategy. Want me to prepare a counterstatement?" "No," I decided. "No statements. Something more visual." "I'm listening." "Victoria has always been obsessed with controlling the Reynolds family image. Let's give the press something else to look at." I moved to the window, gazing out at Rosewood's grounds as my plan crystallized. "Remember those photos from Daniel's? Bachelor party in the Cayman Islands? The ones he claimed were just friends having fun? The ones with him and that blonde at the casino? I thought you believed his explanation. I wanted to, I admitted. But Julian's financial analysis showed significant cash withdrawals in the Caymans during that trip, far more than gambling losses could explain. I suspect those photos show more than just innocent fun. You think he was paying off gambling? Debts, Zoe concluded, using his bachelor party as cover. Or worse. Either way, I need those photos released anonymously an hour before Victoria's press conference. Not through our usual channels. Find someone trustworthy but not connected to us. Consider it done. Anything else? I hesitated, then made another decision. Yes, it's time to speak with William Reynolds. Daniel's father? Are you sure that's wise? Victoria is fighting to protect the family image. William is fighting to avoid financial ruin. Their motivations may not be perfectly aligned. I checked my watch. He plays golf every Thursday afternoon at Oakmont Country Club, alone since most of his former friends have distanced themselves after the rumors about his retirement. You're going to ambush him on the golf course? Zoe sounded impressed. I prefer to think of it as an unscheduled meeting in a private setting. Have a car ready for me in 30 minutes. After hanging up, I changed into more appropriate attire for a surprise visit to an exclusive country club, a simple but elegant. Navy dress, pearl earrings, and low heels suitable for walking on manicured grass. The kind of outfit that would blend seamlessly among Oakmont's wealthy members while conveying quiet authority. An hour later, my driver pulled through the gates of Oakmont Country Club. As the granddaughter of Evelyn Winters, my membership had never been in question, despite the club's notoriously selective admissions process. The same process that had initially rejected William Reynolds until his legal connections eventually secured him entry. The attendant directed me toward the back nine, where William was reportedly just starting the 13th hole. I opted to walk rather than take a golf cart, using the time to gather my thoughts and strategy. I spotted him on the 14th tee, a tee-hour tall, silver-haired man with Daniel's jawline and bearing, though age and stress had added a stoop to his shoulders that his son had yet to develop. He was alone, as expected, methodically setting up his drive. "Mr. Reynolds," I called out, approaching from the cart path. He turned, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to wariness in quick succession. "Charlotte, this is unexpected." "I apologize for interrupting your game," I said, stopping a respectful distance away. "But I believe we have matters to discuss that would benefit from privacy." William Reynolds studied me carefully, absent-mindedly adjusting his grip on the driver. "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss. Victoria is handling the family response to recent events. Yes, I've heard about her injunction and planned press conference." I maintained a neutral tone. Creative approaches, though ultimately futile. He sighed, suddenly looking older than his 65 years. "What do you want, Charlotte?" To speak honestly, away from lawyers and public relations strategies, I gestured to the nearby bench overlooking the fairway. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, setting his driver back in the golf bag. We sat side by side, looking out over the immaculately maintained course. "Your mother is making a mistake," I began without preamble. "Her injunction won't stand, and her press conference will only amplify the scandal she's trying to contain." William's shoulders slumped slightly. "Victoria believes in protecting the family name at all costs. Even when the cost is the truth?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the distant flag marking the 14th hole. "The Reynolds name is all we have left," he finally said, his voice low. "Everything else is compromised. I know about your forced retirement, William, about the client funds, the financial difficulties, Daniel's gambling debts." His head snapped toward me, alarm evident in his expression. "How could you possibly—" It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is what happens next. I turned to face him directly. Victoria is fighting yesterday's battle. The question is whether you're going to join her and lose, or make a different choice. William looked away again, his hands clasped tightly, in his lap. What choice? Daniel has made a mess of things as usual. Victoria is trying to salvage what she can. At what cost? More lies? More deception? How has that strategy worked for the Reynolds family so far? I kept my voice gentle but firm. There's another option. Which is? Acceptance. Dignity. A clean break that allows everyone to move forward. I paused, letting my words sink in. Daniel signs the annulment agreement as written. You and Victoria cease all public and legal interference. I ensure that certain sensitive information about the family's finances remains private. William was silent for a long moment, processing my offer. And Daniel's career? The evidence you apparently have regarding his professional conduct will be handled discreetly through Richard Morgan, with minimal public exposure. Daniel won't practice law in Boston again, but he could rebuild elsewhere. Given time. I met his gaze steadily. It's more than he deserves, and you know it. The sound of distant golf carts and muffled conversation drifted over us as William considered my proposal. I waited patiently, knowing that pushing would only strengthen his resistance. Victoria won't agree, he finally said. She believes there's still a path to salvage both the marriage and our family position. Is that what you believe? He laughed hollowly. What I believe hasn't mattered for years, not since the difficulties at the firm. It matters now, I said firmly. Victoria is acting out of pride and desperation. You have the opportunity to act out of wisdom and foresight. William studied me with new interest. You're very much like your grandmother. Evelyn always could see the board 3 moves ahead. She taught me that the most dignified response to an untenable position is a strategic retreat. Not a surrender, but a calculated repositioning. I stood, smoothing my dress. Victoria's press conference will backfire spectacularly if she proceeds. I'm offering an alternative that preserves what's left of the Reynolds family dignity. What do you need from me? He asked, his voice tired but resolute. Talk to Daniel. Convince him to sign the annulment agreement before Friday, and persuade Victoria to withdraw her injunction and cancel the press conference. She won't listen to me. Make her listen, I said simply. Unless you want Boston, society to be discussing the Reynolds family's financial mismanagement over cocktails at next week's charity gala. William flinched slightly but nodded. I'll try. As I prepared to leave, he called after me. Charlotte, the Reynolds Family Foundation, dinner at Rosewood next month. What happens with that? I turned back. It proceeds as scheduled, with me as the host, as the owner of Rosewood Estate. It will be the Reynolds family's opportunity to demonstrate that they can accept reality with grace. Walking back toward the clubhouse, I felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction. William Reynolds was a proud man brought low by his own poor choices. In him, I could see what Daniel might become in 30 years if he continued on his current path. A hollow shell of former prestige, clinging to the remnants of a family name while drowning in secrets and regrets. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Photos ready for release tomorrow morning. Untraceable source confirmed. Hold until I give the word, I replied. There may be a change of plans. Back in my car, I instructed my driver to take me to Gregory's office. William might convince Daniel to sign the annulment agreement, but I wasn't counting on it. Victoria Reynolds had been managing the family's social strategy for decades. She wouldn't surrender without a fight. The confrontation was entering its final phase. I needed to be prepared for all possibilities, including the nuclear option of complete exposure of the Reynolds family's secrets. As we drove through Boston's historic streets, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in just 1 week. I had planned to spend this day on my honeymoon, basking on a private beach with the man I loved. Instead, I was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of his family's remaining social standing while protecting my own interests. My grandmother would have approved. Never start a war, she used to tell me, but always finish it, decisively. The Reynolds family had declared war the moment Daniel invited his mistress to our wedding. Now they would learn what it meant to face a Winters woman in battle. The yacht. Morning of Victoria Reynolds's press conference dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed at odds with the storm brewing in Boston's social circles. I stood in my penthouse apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of gold and pink, while my television played the early morning news. And coming up at 9, Victoria Reynolds is expected to make a statement regarding the highly publicized wedding scandal involving her son, Daniel Reynolds, and Boston heiress Charlotte Winters. Sources close to the Reynolds family suggest this will be an appeal for privacy and reconciliation. I muted the broadcast and turned to Zoe, who was reviewing media briefing notes at my dining table. "Any word from William?" She shook her head. "Nothing yet, but our sources say Victoria was seen entering their family home late last night, looking agitated. They apparently had quite the argument." "And Daniel?" Still maintaining radio silence, his attorney contacted Gregory this morning to request an extension on the annulment agreement deadline. I checked my watch. 7:30 a.m. Victoria's press conference was scheduled for 9 at the Reynolds law firm. We had prepared for multiple scenarios, including the nuclear option of releasing the Cayman Islands photos and financial evidence if Victoria proceeded with her planned narrative. My phone rang, Gregory's number. "I just received a call from Lawrence Harrington," he said without preamble. "Victoria is requesting a private meeting with you before the press conference." I raised an eyebrow, though he couldn't see it. "Where and when?" "The Boston Garden. The pavilion by the swan boats. 8:15. The Boston Public Garden. Neutral ground. Public enough to be safe, but private enough for a real conversation, if both parties kept their voices down. A strategic choice. Tell Harrington I'll be there, I decided, but I'll be bringing you as counsel." "Understood. I'll meet you at the garden entrance in 30 minutes. After ending the call, I turned to Zoe. "Victoria wants to meet. Keep the photos ready, but hold on releasing them until you hear from me." Zoe nodded, her expression concerned. "Be careful, Charlotte. Victoria Reynolds didn't maintain her social position for decades by playing fair." "Neither did my grandmother," I replied with a small smile. "And I'm her heir in more ways than one." 40 minutes later, Gregory and I walked through the morning quiet paths of the Boston Public Garden. Early joggers and a few tourists were the only others present, giving the space a peaceful atmosphere that belied the tension of our impending meeting. Victoria Reynolds was already waiting at the pavilion, alone, except for a distinguished older man I recognized as Lawrence Harrington. She cut an impressive figure in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her posture rigid with pride and determination. At 63, she still commanded attention in any room or garden she occupied. "Charlotte," she greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming." "Victoria," I replied evenly. "I believe you know Gregory Walsh." She nodded curtly toward Gregory before gesturing to her companion. "And this is Lawrence Harrington, our family attorney." Pleasantries exchanged, we all took seats on the pavilion benches, the morning sun casting dappled shadows through the surrounding trees. "I'll be direct," Victoria began, her voice low but intense. "This situation has escalated beyond what benefits anyone involved. The press coverage is damaging to both our families, and the legal maneuvers are becoming counterproductive." I studied her carefully, noting the slight shadows beneath her expertly applied makeup. She hadn't been sleeping well. "I appreciate your candor, Victoria. However, I'm not the one who filed an injunction or scheduled a press conference." Sometimes the threat of action is necessary to create the conditions for negotiation, she replied smoothly, which is why we're here now. Gregory shifted beside me, a subtle reminder of his presence and support. May I ask what exactly you're proposing, Mrs. Reynolds? Victoria's eyes never left mine. A compromise. Daniel signs the annulment agreement with modified terms on confidentiality. Charlotte agrees to a joint statement describing the marriage's end as a mutual decision based on irreconcilable differences. No mention of specific events at the wedding. And your injunction? I asked. Withdrawn immediately, of course. I considered her offer, reading between the lines. Victoria was retreating, but trying to salvage what she could of the family's reputation. The question was whether this was a genuine olive branch or merely a tactical pause. And what prompted this change of heart, Victoria? Just yesterday, you were prepared to tell the world that outside influences were destroying a promising young marriage. Something flickered in her eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or resignation. William and I had a frank discussion last night. He shared his perspective on the situation. So William had indeed spoken to her after our golf course conversation. Interesting. See? I smoothed my skirt, a gesture that gave me a moment to collect my thoughts. Your proposal has merit, but it's missing a key element. Which is, Harrington asked, speaking for the first time, accountability. I met Victoria's gaze directly. Your son betrayed me in a calculated public manner. Your first instinct was to defend him and attack me, rather than acknowledging the reality of what occurred. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The press conference will be canceled. Isn't that acknowledgement enough? No, I said simply. The joint statement needs to include an apology from Daniel for his behavior. Not specific details, but a clear acceptance of responsibility. That's asking a lot, Harrington interjected. An explicit apology could have professional implications for Daniel's career. His career is already compromised, as I believe you're both aware. I kept my voice neutral despite the implied threat. The apology is non-negotiable. Victoria studied me for a long moment, reassessing. I could almost see her calculating the costs and benefits, weighing her dwindling options. Very well, she finally said. A brief acknowledgement of responsibility from Daniel, no explicit details. The annulment proceeds without contest. The joint statement emphasizes privacy and mutual respect going forward. And one more thing, I added. The Reynolds Family Foundation dinner at Rosewood next month. It proceeds as scheduled, with me as host in my capacity as owner of the estate. This was clearly a sticking point for Victoria. The annual dinner was her crowning social event, her opportunity to reinforce the family's position among Boston's elite. Having me host would be a public confirmation of the power shift between our families. That's unnecessary, she said, a hint of her earlier steel returning to her voice. The foundation could easily move the event to another venue. It could, I agreed. But that would raise questions that might lead to discussions about why the relationship between our families changed so dramatically. Discussions neither of us wants to encourage. The swan boats were beginning their first tours of the day, families with young children boarding the whimsical vessels for a gentle cruise around the garden's lagoon. Such a contrast to our tense negotiation just yards away. Victoria glanced at Harrington, who gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. The dinner proceeds at Rosewood, she conceded. But with joint hosting, you and the foundation board, which I chair. A reasonable compromise. Agreed. Gregory produced a tablet from his briefcase. I've drafted a preliminary agreement incorporating these points. If you're ready to proceed in good faith, we can finalize the details now. As Victoria and Harrington reviewed the document, I observed the small flock of ducks paddling peacefully across the lagoon. My grandmother had often brought me here as a child, teaching me to feed the ducks while imparting lessons about patience and strategy. The most successful negotiations, she would tell me, are those where everyone believes they've secured their most important objectives, even if they've conceded on others. Victoria was getting what she valued most: the preservation of the Reynolds family's public image and a dignified exit from the scandal. I was getting what I needed: my freedom from Daniel, control of the narrative, and a clear demonstration of my position as Rosewood's owner. "We have an agreement in principle," Harrington announced after several minutes of review and quiet discussion with Victoria. "We'll need Daniel's signature, of course." "Of course," I replied. "I trust you can secure that promptly." Victoria's smile was thin but no longer hostile. "Daniel will cooperate. William is speaking with him now." As Gregory and Harrington worked through the final language, Victoria turned to me, lowering her voice. "You're formidable, Charlotte. More so than I anticipated." "Thank you," I replied, recognizing the backhanded compliment for what it was, though I'd have preferred to demonstrate that quality under different circumstances. "Indeed." She paused, something almost like regret crossing her features. "For what it's worth, I did believe you would be good for Daniel. Your family's stability, your grandmother's influence, I thought perhaps you could guide him toward better choices." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Victoria Reynolds. "Daniel makes his own choices, Victoria, as do we all." She nodded, our brief moment of candor already fading as Harrington called her attention back to the agreement. 30 minutes later, as we left the garden, Gregory gave me an approving nod. "Well done, Charlotte. You held your ground while giving Victoria a face-saving way to retreat. She's protecting what matters most to her, the family's social position," I observed, "just as I'm protecting what matters to me." "Which is?" I paused on the garden's bridge, looking back at the pavilion where Victoria and Harrington still sat, finalizing details. "My independence, my family's legacy, and the truth, even if only a few of us ever know all of it." My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Press at Reynolds and Blackwell being told conference is canceled." "Victory? Compromise," I replied, "but a favorable one. Stand down on the photos." As Gregory and I walked back to where his driver waited, I felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief that the confrontation was moving toward resolution, lingering, anger at Daniel's betrayal, and an unexpected emptiness now that the strategic battle was winding down. "What will you do now?" Gregory asked as if reading my thoughts. "After the annulment is finalized?" It was a good question. I had been so focused on responding to the crisis that I hadn't thought much beyond it. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Continue my grandmother's work with the hospitality group. Travel, perhaps." I had put several projects on hold for the wedding and honeymoon planning. What I didn't say was that I also needed time to rebuild my trust in my own judgment. I had completely misread Daniel, believing in a relationship that had been, from his perspective, largely transactional. "Whatever you decide," Gregory said kindly, "Evelyn would be proud of how you've handled this situation. You've shown strength without vindictiveness, strategy without cruelty." As we drove away from the garden, I glanced back at the peaceful oasis in the midst of the bustling city. The confrontation wasn't completely over. Papers still needed to be signed, statements released, the foundation dinner navigated. But the most dangerous moment had passed. Victoria Reynolds had extended an olive branch, albeit one wrapped in thorns. I had accepted it without drawing blood. We had both recognized that mutually assured destruction served neither family's interests. Now it was time to build what came next. 1 month later, I stood at the entrance to Rosewood Estates' grand ballroom, greeting guests as they arrived for the Reynolds Family Foundation annual dinner. The space had been transformed into a shimmering wonderland of silver and blue, Victoria's chosen colors for this year's theme of ocean conservation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegant table settings, ice sculptures of marine life and cascading arrangements of white orchids and blue hydrangeas. Everything was perfect, exactly as Victoria had specified in her meticulous planning documents. I had ensured that every detail was executed flawlessly, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the specifically timed serving of each course. Tonight wasn't about asserting dominance. It was about demonstrating grace. "Charlotte, darling, everything looks magnificent," Victoria herself approached, resplendent in a silver gown that perfectly complemented the decor. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you, Victoria," I replied with a genuine smile. "Your vision for the event was inspiring." Past month has brought an unexpected evolution in our relationship. After our garden confrontation and the subsequent agreement, Victoria had approached our co-hosting duties with professional courtesy that gradually warmed into something resembling mutual respect. We would never be friends. Too much had happened. But we had found a workable equilibrium. "The governor just arrived," she murmured, nodding toward the entrance where security personnel were conducting discreet checks. "Would you join me in welcoming him?" Together, we greeted Governor Mitchell and his wife, seamlessly sharing hosting duties as if we'd been doing it for years. To anyone watching, we were the picture of Boston high society at its most cordial. The established matriarch and the younger heiress, united in philanthropic purpose. No one would guess that just 4 weeks earlier, we had been locked in a high-stakes negotiation over her son's infidelity and the reputation of 2 prominent families. The annulment had been finalized 2 weeks ago with minimal public drama. The joint statement, carefully crafted by our respective teams, had acknowledged the end of the marriage due to irreconcilable differences, with a brief note that Mr. Reynolds regrets actions that contributed to the relationship's dissolution. Vague enough to save face, specific enough to indicate where responsibility lay. Daniel himself had been conspicuously absent from Boston's social scene since signing the papers. According to Gregory's sources, he had accepted a position with a mid-sized firm in Chicago, a significant step down from his partnership track at Reynolds, Blackwell, and Morgan, but a fresh start away from the whispers and knowing glances that would have followed him in Boston. "Charlotte, you look absolutely stunning," Richard Morgan approached with his wife, breaking my reverie. "That gown is exquisite." I smiled, smoothing the midnight blue silk of my dress, a custom creation I had originally ordered for my honeymoon. "Thank you, Richard. I'm so glad you could both make it tonight." "We wouldn't miss it," his wife replied warmly. "The Foundation's work on marine habitat preservation is more important than ever." As they moved toward the bar, Richard leaned in slightly. "The transition at the firm is complete. All of Daniel's cases have been reassigned, and the clients informed of his departure. No details were shared beyond personal reasons, as agreed." I nodded appreciatively. Richard had handled the delicate situation with characteristic discretion, protecting both the firm's reputation and client relationships while respecting our agreement to avoid unnecessary public scandal. The ballroom gradually filled with Boston's elite, business leaders, politicians, old money families, and rising stars in various fields. Many had attended my wedding just 1 month earlier, witnessing the dramatic revelation and aftermath. Tonight, they watched with curious eyes as I moved confidently through the crowd, clearly in command of the estate they had always associated with my grandmother. "You've managed this beautifully," Zoe whispered, appearing at my side with a champagne flute. "Half the room is in awe of you, and the other half is terrified of getting on your bad side." I laughed softly. "That wasn't exactly my goal." "No, but it's a delightful side effect." She blinked her glass against mine. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I echoed, taking a sip of the excellent champagne. My gaze drifted across the room, landing momentarily on William Reynolds, who stood somewhat apart from the main crowd, nursing what appeared to be a club soda rather than his usual scotch. He caught my eye and gave a small, respectful nod, which I returned. Our golf course conversation had been brief but impactful. for both of us, it seemed. Victoria approached the microphone as dinner was about to be served, tapping it gently to gain everyone's attention. Distinguished guests, friends, and supporters of the Reynolds Family Foundation, welcome to our annual dinner. Her voice carried effortlessly across the ballroom, testament to decades of public speaking experience. Tonight is particularly special as we gather at the historic Rosewood Estate, graciously hosted by Charlotte Winters. She gestured toward me, and I felt hundreds of eyes turn in my direction. Charlotte exemplifies the spirit of community and cooperation that defines Boston's philanthropic tradition, and we are deeply grateful for her partnership in this evening's event. Polite applause followed, and I inclined my head in acknowledgement. Victoria's words were carefully chosen, acknowledging my position as host without explicitly mentioning my ownership of Rosewood or the collapsed marriage to her son. A diplomatic masterclass. This year's theme, Ocean Conservation, reflects our commitment to preserving the natural beauty of New England's coastline for future generations. As Victoria continued her opening remarks, I scanned the room, noting the subtle power dynamics at play. Boston society was realigning itself in real time, adjusting to the new reality where the anticipated merger of the Reynolds and Winters families had not materialized, but both continued to wield significant influence in their respective spheres. The evening progressed smoothly through dinner and the Foundation's presentation on their conservation initiatives. I made a point to circulate among the tables, engaging with guests and expressing genuine interest in the Foundation's work. This wasn't mere performance. Marine conservation had been one of my grandmother's passionate causes, and I was committed to continuing her support. After the formal program concluded and guests moved to the garden terrace for coffee and dessert, I found myself momentarily alone near one of the ice sculptures, an intricately carved dolphin that was slowly melting, its crystalline form gradually losing definition as the evening wore on. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" a familiar voice said behind me, even in its impermanence. I turned to find Olivia Martinez standing there, elegant in a simple black dress, so different from the red one she had worn to my wedding. "Olivia," I said, surprised but not displeased. "I didn't expect to see you here," she offered a slight smile. The district attorney is a major supporter of the Foundation's Environmental Legal Defense Fund. He invited several of us from the office. She gestured toward a group of professional-looking individuals across the terrace. I wasn't sure if I should come, given everything. But I wanted to see how you were doing. "I'm well," I replied honestly. "And you? How's the DA's office?" "Challenging, fulfilling." She paused. A clean slate. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the ice sculpture slowly transform. "Have you heard from him?" she finally asked, not needing to specify who she meant. "No," I said. "The annulment is final, and he's moved to Chicago. Our paths are unlikely to cross again." She nodded. "I'm glad. For you, I mean, that it's resolved." "Thank you." I studied her, noting the absence of the guilt and turmoil that had been so evident during our hotel meeting. "You seem lighter." "I am." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Turns out, telling the truth, even when it's difficult, even when it makes you look bad, is surprisingly liberating." Before I could respond, Gregory appeared at my elbow. "Charlotte, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Senator Collins was hoping to speak with you about the Winters Foundation's potential collaboration on his coastal protection bill." "Of course," I said, turning back to Olivia. "Duty calls. It was good to see you, Olivia." "You too, Charlotte." She hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I think you handled everything with remarkable grace. Your grandmother would be proud." As I made my way across the terrace to where the senator waited, I reflected on Olivia's words. The past month had been a crucible, transforming me in ways I was still discovering. The betrayal that should have destroyed me had instead revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The evening wound down as midnight approached. Guests departed with effusive thanks and compliments, many stopping to express their admiration for both the event and the Foundation's work. Victoria and I stood side by side at the entrance, the perfect co-hosts bidding farewell to Boston's elite. When the last guest had departed, Victoria turned to me, her usual composure softened slightly by exhaustion, and perhaps the 2 glasses of champagne she had permitted herself. "Thank you, Charlotte," she said simply. "This evening was everything the Foundation needed it to be." "I'm glad," I replied. "The cause deserves the support." She hesitated, then added, "William and I will be spending more time at our place in Vermont. Boston has become complicated for us." I understood the unspoken message. The Reynolds family was making a strategic retreat from the social battlefield, regrouping away from the whispers and speculation. "Vermont is beautiful year-round," I offered neutrally. "A good place to focus on what matters." Victoria nodded, a flash of something like gratitude in her eyes. Indeed. As her car pulled away from Rosewood's circular drive, I remained on the yacht's steps, looking up at the estate that had been the setting for both my greatest humiliation and my unexpected rebirth. In just 1 month, I had lost a husband, confronted powerful adversaries, negotiated a complex resolution, and hosted one of Boston's premier social events. Yet standing there in the quiet of the spring night, I felt not exhaustion, but a curious sense of anticipation. My grandmother had often said that life's most difficult moments were simply clearing the way for new possibilities. For the first time since Daniel had betrayed me, I felt genuinely curious about what those possibilities might be. Elena appeared at the door. "Ms. Charlotte, everything has been cleared away. The staff is finished for the night." "Thank you, Elena," I said, finally turning to enter the house. "It was a successful evening." "Yes," she agreed with a knowing smile. "Ms. Evelyn would have been very proud." As I climbed the grand staircase toward my grandmother's, now my, private apartments, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as an enduring influence, a voice of wisdom that had guided me through the darkest month of my life. "Show them what it means to underestimate the wrong woman," I whispered to myself, echoing my thoughts from that fateful wedding day. And I had. 6 months after the fateful wedding day that changed everything, I stood on the private balcony of the presidential suite at the Winters Grand Hotel in Manhattan, watching the city lights sparkle beneath a clear, autumn sky. The crisp October air carried hints of the approaching winter, but I was warm in my cashmere wrap, a glass of excellent Cabernet in hand. The New York skyline never failed to energize me, its relentless pulse and ambition a perfect match for my current state of mind. I had spent the past week finalizing plans for the newest addition to the Winters Hospitality Group, a boutique hotel in the heart of Soho that would cater to the city's creative elite. The project had consumed my attention for months, a welcome focus as I rebuilt my life in the aftermath of Daniel's betrayal. A gentle knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, not turning from the view. "The board members have arrived for dinner," Elena informed me. My loyal housekeeper had insisted on accompanying me to New York for this important meeting, claiming that no hotel staff, however well-trained, could anticipate my needs as she could. "Thank you, Elena. I'll be down momentarily." After she departed, I lingered for one more moment on the balcony, savoring the quiet before an evening of business discussions and strategic planning. The Winters Hospitality Group board meeting was the official reason for my New York trip, but it wasn't the only one. Tomorrow, I would be meeting with Douglas Chen, the brilliant architect whose vision for the Soho property had captivated me from our first conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, landed safely in Paris. The Winters Riviera is even more stunning than the pictures. "You're a genius for acquiring this property." I smiled, typing back, "Enjoy your vacation. You've earned it after the PR masterclass you've orchestrated these past 6 months. Zoe had indeed worked miracles, transforming what could have been a devastating social scandal into a story of resilience and reinvention. The narrative around me had shifted from jilted bride to formidable businesswoman continuing her family's legacy, exactly as we had planned. With one last look at the glittering cityscape, I returned inside to prepare for dinner. As I slipped into a sleek black dress and fastened my grandmother's sapphire pendant around my neck, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was familiar yet changed, more confident, more focused, perhaps a touch more guarded than she had been 6 months ago. The private dining room at the hotel's acclaimed restaurant had been arranged exactly to my specifications. Elegant, but not ostentatious, the table set for 7 board members plus myself. As the newest and youngest member of the board, I had initially faced skepticism when I proposed expanding the group's portfolio after my grandmother's retirement. That skepticism had faded as my first 2 projects exceeded revenue projections by nearly 30%. "Charlotte, you look wonderful." James Harrington, the board's chairman and my grandmother's longtime friend, greeted me warmly. At 72, James retained the sharp mind and direct manner that had made him a successful investment banker before joining the Winters board. "Thank you, James. How was your flight from Boston?" "Uneventful, thankfully. Victoria Reynolds sends her regards, by the way. I saw her at the Symphony fundraiser last weekend." I nodded, appreciating his casual delivery of this information. James was too tactful to mention Daniel or the aborted marriage, but his mention of Victoria was deliberate, a way of letting me know that Boston society had moved on, just as I had. "Please give her my best when you see her next," I replied smoothly. I understand the Foundation's conservation initiative is making impressive progress. As the other board members arrived, the conversation shifted to business matters, occupancy rates at our existing properties, expansion opportunities, the strategic 5-year plan I had developed. I presented my vision for the Soho Hotel with confidence, fielding questions, and addressing concerns with the data-driven approach my grandmother had taught me. "The demographic analysis supports a premium positioning," I explained, indicating the projections displayed on the dining room's discrete screen. "Soho's creative professionals and the tech industry executives moving into the area are seeking authentic luxury experiences, not just high-end accommodations. And you believe this architect, Chen, can deliver that authenticity?" asked Margaret Winters, my second cousin and the most conservative voice on the board. "His previous work has been quite avant-garde." "That's precisely why he's perfect for this project," I replied. "His designs honor historical elements while introducing modern functionality and unexpected touches. It's exactly the balance we need to distinguish ourselves in an increasingly competitive market." The discussion continued through dinner, the initial skepticism gradually giving way to cautious enthusiasm as I addressed each concern methodically. By dessert, even Margaret was nodding thoughtfully at the potential return on investment. "Well, Charlotte," James said as the meeting concluded, "I think I speak for the board when I say we're impressed with the thoroughness of your proposal. You have our approval to proceed with the Soho project as outlined." A chorus of agreement followed, along with handshakes and congratulations as the board members departed for their respective accommodations. James lingered after the others had gone, signaling he wanted a private word. "Your grandmother called me yesterday," he said once we were alone. "She's following your progress from France with great interest." I smiled, picturing Evelyn in her Mediterranean villa, no doubt still reviewing reports and offering unsolicited advice to her former colleagues, despite her official retirement. "And what did she think of my Soho proposal?" James chuckled. "She said you were thinking too small, that you should be looking at properties in London and Tokyo as well." That sounded exactly like my grandmother, always pushing, always expanding. Horizons. "One project at a time," I replied. "But international expansion is certainly on the roadmap." His expression grew more serious. She also mentioned that she heard about Daniel Reynolds. Apparently, he's struggling in Chicago. The firm isn't what he expected, and his gambling issues have resurfaced. I absorbed this information without visible reaction, though inwardly I felt a complex mix of emotions. A twinge of pity, a flash of vindication, and most surprisingly, a profound sense of indifference. Daniel's struggles were no longer my concern. "Hope he finds the help he needs," I said sincerely. James studied me for a moment, then nodded with approval. "Evelyn said you'd respond exactly that way. She's very proud of you, Charlotte, not just for your business acumen, but for how you've handled everything life has thrown at you this year." After James left, I wandered through the quiet hotel, taking pleasure in observing the late-night operations of the property. The Winters Grand had been my grandmother's flagship, the cornerstone upon which she had built her hospitality empire after my grandfather's death. Every detail reflected her exacting standards and visionary approach. I found myself in the hotel's magnificent lobby, with its soaring ceilings and Art Deco elegance. At this hour, it was nearly empty, save for a few late arrivals checking in, and the attentive staff ensuring everything ran smoothly. "Ms. Winters?" A voice called from the reception desk. "There's a package for you." The night manager handed me a small parcel wrapped in simple brown paper. No return address, just my name written in a familiar hand. I took it to a quiet corner of the lobby lounge before carefully opening it. Inside was a velvet jewelry box and a handwritten note on heavy, cream stationery. "Charlotte, this belonged to my grandmother, as the sapphire pendant you wear belonged to yours. Family legacies matter, even when families falter. I thought you should have it, as you are the one who truly understood its value." With respect and regret, Victoria Reynolds, inside the box lay an exquisite Art Deco brooch, platinum set with diamonds, and sapphires in a geometric pattern typical of the 1920s. I recognized it immediately from the photographs in the Reynolds family home, worn by Victoria's grandmother at significant social events throughout her lifetime. It was a peace offering, but also something more profound, an acknowledgement that I, not Daniel, had been the worthy recipient of the Reynolds family heritage. A symbolic passing of respect from one formidable woman to another. I closed the box carefully, touched by the unexpected gesture. Victoria and I would never be close, but this suggested a level of mutual respect I hadn't anticipated. Perhaps in another life, under different circumstances, we might even have been allies. The following morning, I met Douglas Chen at his downtown studio, a converted industrial space filled with architectural models, material samples, and large format renderings. At 35, Douglas had already established himself as one of the most innovative architects in the country. His work featured in major design publications and sought after by discerning clients worldwide. "Charlotte," he greeted me warmly, extending his hand. "It's great to see you again." "You too, Douglas. I'm excited to see how the designs have evolved." His enthusiasm was contagious as he led me through the studio to a large table where the model of the Soho Hotel stood. Over the next 2 hours, we discussed every aspect of the project, from the restored facade of the historic building to the rooftop garden that would offer a green oasis amid the urban landscape. "What I love about this project," Douglas said, as we examined the detailed floor plans, "is that it honors what came before while creating something entirely new. The building has a story, and we're adding a chapter rather than rewriting it completely." I glanced up, struck by the parallel to my own life. That's exactly what I've been trying to do with the Winters properties. Honor my grandmother's vision while bringing something fresh to each project. He smiled, his eyes meeting mine with unexpected warmth. It's a delicate balance, respecting tradition without being bound by it. Exactly. As our meeting concluded, Douglas hesitated before asking, "Would you be interested in getting dinner tonight? There's a great little place, just a few blocks from here. The chef is doing amazing things with local ingredients." I considered his invitation, aware of the subtle shift from professional to personal. Douglas was brilliant, creative, and by any objective standard, attractive, with his thoughtful dark eyes and casual confidence. Under normal circumstances, I might have accepted without hesitation. "I'd like that," I heard myself say, surprising both of us. "But let's be clear that this is just dinner between colleagues who enjoy each other's company." He nodded, his expression honest and direct. "Of course, though I hope you'll allow me to at least aspire to friendship. Colleagues sound so formal." That evening, as we shared an excellent meal in the small, unpretentious restaurant Douglas had recommended, our conversation flowed easily from architecture to art, from travel experiences to favorite books. Not once did he mention my broken marriage or the scandal that had briefly dominated Boston's social circles, though as a New Yorker with connections to the design world, he surely knew the outline of what had happened. Instead, he treated me as what I was, a successful businesswoman with her own vision and ambitions. It was refreshing, this freedom from being defined by what had happened to me rather than what I was creating. "What made you choose hospitality as your focus?" he asked as we lingered over dessert. "With your family's resources, you could have pursued any industry." I considered the question, appreciating its thoughtfulness. "My grandmother, primarily. Watching her transform spaces that welcome people, that create experiences and memories. It always seemed like the most meaningful kind of business. Buildings that aren't just structures, but stages for important moments in people's lives." Douglas nodded, understanding immediately. "That's what drew me to architecture. The knowledge that what I design becomes the backdrop for thousands of human stories." As we walked back toward my hotel later that night, the autumn air crisp around us, I felt a sense of possibility that had been absent for months. Not specifically about Douglas, though his company had been genuinely enjoyable, but about the future stretching before me, unmapped but full of potential. My phone buzzed with an email notification, preliminary renderings from Douglas's team for the hotel's signature restaurant. Even now, the project was moving forward, taking shape not just in models and drawings, but in real decisions that would soon transform a neglected building into a vibrant destination. "Thank you for dinner," I said as we reached the hotel entrance, "and for a conversation that didn't once touch on Boston society gossip." He smiled. "I figured you've had enough of that to last a lifetime. Besides, I'm much more interested in what you're building now than what collapsed in the past." We parted with a handshake and tentative plans to visit the Soho property together the following week. No pressure, no expectations, just two professionals with shared interests and complementary visions. As I rode the elevator to my suite, I found myself thinking of my grandmother's favorite quotation, framed on the wall of her office at Rosewood. "The best revenge is not just success, but success on your own terms." 6 months ago, I stood in my wedding dress, watching my carefully constructed future crumble as Daniel's mistress revealed his betrayal. I had felt humiliated, shattered, lost, if only for a moment. Then something within me had risen to the challenge, drawing on strengths I hadn't known I possessed and lessons my grandmother had been teaching me all along. Opening the doors to my suite, I walked directly to the balcony, drawn again to the wide, glittering panorama of the city. New York stretched before me, a landscape of ambition and possibility. Tomorrow, I would visit the Soho property with fresh eyes, envisioning not just what it had been or what it was, but what it could become. Just like me. My phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. "Heard the board approved your proposal." Never doubted they would. "Remember what I taught you? Build not just structures, but legacies." I smiled, typing back, "Learning from the best." "The Soho project is just the beginning." Her response came quickly. "Of course it is. A winter's woman. Never think small." Standing there under the vast night sky, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. not despite the challenges of the past 6 months, but because of them. Daniel's betrayal had freed me from a marriage that would have slowly diminished me. His mistress's dramatic appearance at our wedding had revealed the truth before I became too entangled in his deceptions. Even Victoria's initially hostile response had ultimately led to a resolution that preserved dignity on all sides. Every crisis truly was an opportunity in disguise. My wedding day disaster had not been an ending but a beginning, the first step on a path that was entirely my own. I raised my glass to the city lights, to my grandmother watching from afar, to the woman I was becoming. To new beginnings, I whispered, and to the underestimated women who create them. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.